Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Bo Talifer and Eric Rasmussen. Episode 11, Getting into the Nitty-Gritty of Teaching Rhythm.
All right, thanks for joining us. In this episode, we're going to get into some very nitty-gritty about classroom application. So we've got a big list of interesting topics here. Eric, so why don't we talk about this thing that's been on our minds, it's coming up in the MLT community, about rhythm syllables. So at the oral level, before we're using verbal associates, we still have to make some kind of sound with our mouth to copy a rhythm sound. And, we could go, there's all kinds of TTs and babas and dadas and bada and all those types of sounds. Could you just unpack what the debate is between people here?
Well, my contention about getting young mouths to do rhythms, first of all, your mouth is the most coordinated thing in the whole body, right? You consider what your tongue and lips and everything can do to make language possible. But when you're, even not quite 1 year old, you're coming up with, mama and dada as much comes out before mama. Moms are always upset because their child always says dada first. Because dada is dada is a lot easier to say than mama for a young mouth. So da, right, is dada.
Wait, maybe the kids copy dada because they hear the mom saying dada more.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah, because dada's gonna take. Who knows? Who knows? I don't know.
In defense of mothers.
Yes, mothers can never be overrated. That's for sure.
So when we're talking about really young kids doing this, there are physical limitations that come into play
when you're asking,
how much coordination they have.
When you're asking kids to imitate or to respond in making a rhythm. Obviously, their bodies and their hands aren't coordinated enough to keep a beat, or they'll drum. This is a natural thing of them, is to hit things and to do it a couple, 3 times. And I have kids that like to imitate hitting things, whether it's the floor or the chair or whether there's an actual drum there. That I like them to have that experience of reacting to when they do hit a drum. So it's not like I hide drums from kids in classrooms, especially if it's a big one and they can feel the vibration. I also have a shaker made out of togo seeds, and the kids love the noise from that, and they just tickle it and play it, and they recognize that it makes this noise. And sometimes I'll say ba ba ba, and they'll hit it ba ba ba, or some. Right, so so there's one thing that is generally discouraged, is like playing rhythms or doing that, and I think it's a great experience for kids to have that. It's not necessarily the way I encourage people to teach rhythm using that way only, or using that way even significantly. Kids like to hear the response of an instrument when they play it. It's just a natural play thing for them. So I
just want to bring up 2 quick things about that. One, this runs through a lot of what we're talking about. We're generally not recommending abandoning techniques that are championed by the MLT community. Like in the other conversations we talk about, and we recommend doing the harmonic learning sequence stuff, but we're not saying don't do tonal patterns. Here we're saying we're not saying don't do oral essentially. Right?
Yeah, this is a huge trigger warning for anybody that listens to this that's an MLT practitioner. We're going to be talking about things that I actually do have some disagreements, but there's things that I add-ons, and there's some things that I think are just developmental beyond what's generally spoken about or taught from what I can tell in the MLT community.
I do think there are a lot of practical considerations around what you're saying, especially if you are an instrumental teacher, just in terms of the economics of what you're doing. There are people who are coming to you for instrumental lessons, and they might not fully understand the concept of how important using the voice is for learning to audiate and all that. So, to give them a regime of just vocal only stuff when they're coming to play the guitar, it doesn't. I don't think it's actually a good long term plan for those students. So, I always explain when I'm doing stuff with students, we do it on the instrument and with their voice. We go back and forth all the time. It just gets to the point where, if I ask them to do something on the instrument, they know how to do it with their voice because they've been asked to do it so many times. But I would never have someone not touch an instrument because I don't think they can audiate well enough to start hitting it or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you can also maybe teach the coordination that you need, in the pick or in your fingers or whatever, uh, at the same time that you're teaching audiation. Those things
Hmm.
don't necessarily have to go one before the other. Of course, it's better if they audiate before you try to take that and apply it to the instrument because they have so much more success. But rather than avoid it, is what you're saying, to go ahead and use the instrument, even if they may not be able to audiate that.
Yeah, and we'll get into more instrumental stuff because I do think there are dependable ways to teach kinesthetic audiation, and I'm comfortable with that on the guitar and the piano. And from what I've seen, there are worse ways to do it
Yep.
as well. So
Yeah. Those kids generally already have a fair amount of coordination relative to the 1, 2, 3-year-olds that I'm talking about here with.
I do think there is a coordination. I don't know if you want to call it coordination aptitude, but certain instruments require a much higher level of just motor coordination, and that doesn't mean that people who can't audiate are going to play those instruments well. But I have no doubt if you took people with very similar aptitude profiles in harmony and rhythm, like if you somehow could get a group of people who had just pin drop identical aptitude scores, some of them will do better on a guitar or a violin who have better motor coordination than ones who don't have the same level of motor coordination. And I mean, I've seen this so much on the guitar. It's almost to the point where the type of music they like playing on the guitar gets influenced by that.
Yeah, isn't there in any music instruction a relationship uh, between your aptitude and your coordination? Like whether it's your breathing coordination, if even if you're just a singer, that we're pairing together your audiation, your mind with movement somewhere, and that movement gets very specific when you start to apply it to, an instrument
Exactly.
or even your voice. There's a specific kind of movement that your mouth and your body forms together to get the appropriate, tone quality, the appropriate pitch, the appropriate, expressive elements, all of that. You're training the athlete, uh,
Totally.
and in relationship to audiation. So there's, when we talk about kinesthetic audiation, well, what is that? That is, to me, it's like your mind and your fingers are at one because you've practiced enough that your fingers just know what they're what they're audiating, or you're
Oh
audiating
yeah,
what
like I can.
yeah, you're audiating what your
I mean,
fingers
I
can
used to
do.
do this all the time in English class. I'd finish my work and I would just sit there and I would just I would hold my arm in front of me like it was a guitar neck, and I would just basically play this guitar neck. And I can't move my fingers without hearing the guitar part at the same time. And the reverse happens if I hear the guitar part. It feels like my fingers are starting to wire up for it.
Yeah, I made the mistake of practicing my trumpet in the seminar once. I had 3 days to just practice my fingers.
Yeah,
And when I got home, it was awful because
you mentioned that to me.
yeah, it was horrible. I had to.
Well, are you familiar with that study that they did with they took people who had never played the piano before, and they had one group played the piano for 2 hours a day for 5 days a week, playing just like it's like a C major scale going up and down, and then the other group did the same thing, but they weren't allowed to use an actual piano. And what they found at the end, they did MRIs of how their motor cortex changed. The group that didn't play the real piano had virtually the same gains in terms of how their motor cortex changed, and they needed about 2 extra hours of practice. So they did 10 hours of mental practice, 2 hours of real practice, and these are people who they didn't touch piano at
That's
all,
far out.
and they sounded just as good as the people who did 10 hours. So
Yeah.
I always market this to my students as, when the best time to review your mental practice for guitar is at school, when you're doing something you don't want to be doing anyway, and you're just staring off. I'd rather have them practice guitar, and they do it. Mental practice is good. Anyways,
Yeah.
to digress. So we have these rhythm syllables. And so
Go ahead.
well, I mean, the way you described it is that some people are saying we should be using a lot of B bass sounds, ba 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 ba, versus.
I hear almost everybody that's MLT trained teach 2, 3, 4-year-olds chants that that are only performed on the syllable ba. So ba 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 ba, right? Some chant or whatever. And then I don't know what I just made that one up, but it's all on ba.
Sure.
But if I'm wanting kids to perform with me or after me, that's so much more difficult than ba ba ba. Just hands down, it makes it so much easier for kids to go ba da ba ba da ba ba da ba da ba.
Well, I would even venture you can try this with an adult. Like try it yourself right now, going ba 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 as fast as you can, and then go ba da ba da ba da ba da ba. It's way faster. It's But I mean, faster doesn't mean the coordination's easier, but still.
Yeah, I'm not saying abandon ba ba ba, but it's harder. It's harder, and so do we want to make it harder at the beginning? Or easier at the very beginning. And there's times where you do want to do things that are more difficult, like singing the first note of a pattern is a little bit harder than singing a whole pattern, or singing the resting tone is harder than singing the whole pattern. But we start with those two things in oral and actually verbal association too. You start with those harder. You start with those harder exercises first, because you're wanting to force the kid to audiate, not imitate, at that point. But yeah.
So was there a certain point where you realized that just doing the ba ba bas didn't make sense for you? Was this, how long ago was this? Was it a long time ago?
Oh, forever ago. Because what I did was I was matching what the kids were saying or doing, what was easy in the mouth. So the kid, yeah. So I did, yeah. I hear kids go, na, 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 na. I go, na, 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 na. Whatever they offered me is what I would do. So I'm just using the syllables kids already have in their mouth, and they don't do ba 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 very early at all. And so yeah, da da da, na na na, ba ba ba, ya ya, ba ba ya ya, na na, ga ga. Even the sucking sound.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
Because that tongue is well developed, for
I actually see that
nursing
a lot too.
or whatever. It's a natural tongue movement for very young children.
The weird thing to me about not using the da sound, the ba da ba da ba, is we're gonna eventually do everything with da sounds when we go into solfege anyway. Everything's gonna be do de do. So the D sound is gonna be there a lot more than the ba sound is anyway.
Yeah, it's just you work it in eventually. And I'm not saying don't ever do chants that are only on ba. I have a bunch of them. But when I'm asking a child to help perform, it's easier, and this is hands down the case, it's easier for them to go ba da ba da ba than ba 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 ba. And if I want a kid to learn divisions, it's easier for them to audiate and perform divisions on that syllable, or imitate. It's easier for them to imitate if they're not in audiation. So I'm making it easier. And then once they can do it, on ba da ba da ba, then make it harder. Ba 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 ba.
Sure.
And see if their mouths will keep up to the audiation, because it is just more difficult physically to do that. And so I am all about using many different kinds of, call them scat syllables or whatever you want to call it, that are already easy in the mouth of young kids so that they can imitate, respond, and audiate uh, patterns to you sooner.
You see this with we've talked about this with jazz singers. Like, is it appropriate to use ba 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 for jazz scatting? I think not, because the jazz scatting has, this was the point you brought up, it has its own
It's
syllables that go with
it's
it,
on
and
my
they're always
list,
going
just
ba
like,
ba da ba ba da ba. People do that,
yeah, no.
right? People are already doing that.
When it comes to jazz scat, we you have to improvise syllables. You can't.
Yeah, it's its own stylistic thing that's worth paying attention to in and of itself. It's
There's just,
so that's exactly when you hear Hal Galper like improvise a bebop rhythm, that's what he does.
yeah.
That's the syllable. And if he's using that and the kids learn it faster, I have a hard time anyone entering that debate from another angle unless they have some kind of insane sample size or something to, but it just
You
doesn't make
can't go.
sense. Like the culture does this. Yeah.
I can't do. I can't do a 16th triplet.
We told you folks this was nitty gritty this episode.
So yeah, so uh, and so I think it's terrible, absolutely unconscionable to be teaching duple and triple, and even, the uneven meters,
Mhm.
5/8 and 7/8. I like to call it BBNs. I'm still gonna harp on my big beats are not the same size. BBNs. That's what they are. It's not uneven. It's not anything else. It's just the big beats aren't the same size. So that's my plug for the coinage of what uneven or unusual meters are. So that
Actually,
it's
just I want to stretch that a sec because it does make more sense than calling it fives or seven, because we're gonna get Ron on here
yeah.
at some point, but he brought up a really good point that a bar of five that's all macro beats is way different than a BBN meter.
Yep.
It's completely different. Like
Yep.
if you listen to
Yep.
go listen to Pink Floyd Money,
Yep.
you don't go, it's not a slow motion do bay, it's all macro beats, the whole.
Ding.
And anyways,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that is something different.
So to me, it's absolutely unconscionable that we're not also doing patterns of swing,
Sure.
uh,
Yeah.
as much as we do duple, triple, and swing, and any meter. The stylistic, to me, it's just as unconscionable not to do Latin rhythms. Ba 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 ba, do ta ta ta, right? And you can use the syllables. There, I don't necessarily use butta. Uh, I like
The way you just
bachika.
did it now,
I do. You know what I do?
that-
But bachika, bachika, boom, chika, chika, ka, chika, cha, chika, boom, chika, chika, chika. I do ba and
See,
chika.
that sounds more like a Latin percussion
It is.
section is even playing in your voice
It
too,
is.
right? So
It is.
I know I like that you make these decisions. It's not just based off of there's big stylistic and just practical elements brought into play here. Because to me, when you did that, it sounds more like the Latin percussion section. And just because we use certain syllables for other
Yeah.
things, like why not?
Now, I want to make sure people understand that bachika is not easy in the young child's mouth, but
Sure.
but I want them to hear a stylistic difference that I can't accomplish on ba or bada or da.
I mean, which is part of the aptitude discussion that we had, and hopefully that episode's posted first. But we're really riding home tonal and rhythm aptitude all the time. But you kind of have to teach awareness of style. That's not just going to magically develop on its own unless a student's listening to just Himalayan amounts of music and making these
Yeah.
comparisons. You kind of have to help students by showing them these differences in
Yeah, I'm
styles.
going to get in trouble again here, but go through all the repertoire, and how much of it swings, how much of it is Latin, how much of it is XYZ. Those
Sure.
those are the two I use the most. Most of the stylistic differences that I give children in the classroom is I'm chanting over top recorded music.
Okay, yeah.
The music is happening and I'm emphasizing something I want them to do. uh you know shake 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 your eggies, right? Shake
Sure.
shake them, shake tick ticka tick ticka, while we're listening to recorded music that goes like that. Or whatever it is, by yum bada dee da ba ba bada bee. That's how I don't go ba 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 to a
Well,
symphony.
this is
I
also your point. This is also your point about teaching when you do root melodies, which could be a thing of its own. But when you're teaching root melodies, you teach them with rhythms. Like you're not teaching them as just they're all do's or they're all whatever. Like there's actually the rhythm of what you're going to teach the root melody in is going to be appropriate for whatever style of the song that you're teaching. So if it's a swing tune,
it's
the bass line might swing a little
it's
bit.
easier for children to predict when the change happens if there's a rhythm going into it. A whole note's more difficult than anything, right? To do
Oh,
it to do
sure.
it accurately. So instead of a whole note waiting for
Which
the
it
next change, I do ba 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 da ba change, and that's a lot easier than go
exactly.
ba change, right?
I mean, depending where someone is with their MLT journey too, that concept I think is such a big difference between just the standard decoding way of teaching versus MLT is that because what do you need to be able to audiate to hear the whole note changing? You have to be able to audiate for macro beats and all the micro beats as well, which is like not a small thing to ask of somebody who's just been thrown into this,
Yeah.
jungle of Eric's
And didn't
class.
we already discover through how many different sources, even in this podcast, that we need to know that the change is about to happen, that it happens is more important than knowing what the change is itself.
I think it's I think it's the main thing that people screw up when they start to learn to improvise. You could even go so far as to say, it's one thing to learn how to do a tonal pattern and to have a bit of a tonal repertoire over, these certain chords. But if you're not practicing these changes happening in different orders for different amounts of time, like the harmonic rhythm has to change, um, it doesn't mean you'll be able to generalize and play over everything, right? Just
Yeah.
because you can improvise over 1 4 5, you might be able to improvise over 1 4 5 that comes in a very specific order, but that does not mean you yet have you now have the ability to just generalize that to different harmonic rhythms, different arrangements of that, which is really interesting, actually.
All right. Let's listen to this. Here. Ba 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 da ba da ba. 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 Are you practicing with me like this? Ba da ba da ba. Ba da ba da ba. And I'm bouncing my knees with them and shoulders. Ba da ba ba. Ba da ba ba. Ba da ba ba. Ba da ba. Ba ba da. Ba ba da. Ba ba da. Ba da ba da. Ba da ba da. Ba da ba da. Who's moving with me? Ba da ba da. Ba da ba da. Ba da ba da ba. 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 Ba da ba da. So I'm
Yeah,
doing
they sound like
divisions.
they're doing all right.
Well, that's their very first day of class with me, pre-K. And that's how I
Wow,
start them. I'm not asking them
great.
to imitate me individually. I'm just seeing what they can do. uh, and
Yeah,
once they
totally.
can do that, I'll do them individually on Bada, and then if they can all do, or many of them can do Bada, and imitate the right. And I'm doing. You notice I'm doing syncopations, pickups. I wasn't doing rests, but I was doing syncopation, pickups, divisions,
Sure.
elongations, I do all of that because the worst thing that's happening is they're acculturating, they're absorbing it. The next worst is that they're just randomly responding or purposely responding, and most of them are pretty good imitators at that point. And imitation's just a short order way to audiation if you've got enough vocabulary.
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah.
for me, a lot of imitative
Yeah.
vocabulary is a lot better than having audiation vocabulary initially. It's better to have a stronger, longer base of stuff that kids try to do that don't know if they are in audiation or not.
I think the same goes for people learning jazz improv. And I mean, hopefully listeners can go back and listen to the episode we did where we interviewed Bert Ligon. But that's how he starts people improvising over changes is he explicitly teaches you vocabulary that covers a set of changes because um, there's a set of changes that occur so often in jazz, it just is a lot easier to develop some kind of imitation based vocabulary that covers the whole stream of changes rather than just tonal patterns that cover individual um, chord changes. But I've seen the same thing, and I think the jazz community is very pro imitation. I mean, most of the greats learned from imitation off records, not so much
Yep.
the chord scale theory. Obviously, obviously a lot of people have that. That can be done. I think it's appropriate when it's done at the right time. But there's no doubt that an obscene amount of jazz musicians just transcribe
you
things
don't need
from
any of
records,
that.
sung along
You
with
don't
them,
need any of that
and develop this.
theory and at all ever. And there are people who are intelligent in that realm, so much so, and have the high aptitude, and so it doesn't get in their way to learn theory because their aptitude's so high, or and that kind of intelligence they're using to apply theories. It's like a puzzle intelligence, or some kind of you know it's just a different kind of thinking that can then marry with their powers to audiate. But you got to have both to succeed that way. But there's so many people, and Errol Garner is the case in point. He doesn't know anything,
Sure.
and yet he's one of the most brilliant pianists
Sure.
ever to have lived.
I think though it definitely can be married because we have reports of Stravinsky saying he was inventing things entirely theoretically. It was coming from that end first, and then he would learn to audiate his own madness. And I think his ability to audiate well, plus his ability just to kind of come up with things in a more theoretical sense, he could keep up with himself. You know what I mean?
I'm still catching up to him, but his stuff is tremendous.
But that doesn't often.
He's one of my favorites.
Oh yeah, he's got the style thing just dialed in too. There are a lot of other air quote modern composers. When I mean modern, I mean the last 100+ years.
Too, just like this sense of like sonority. It's great.
And don't get me wrong, I love like Schoenberg and a bunch of these other more modern composers, but I mean, go listen to Firebird and then put whatever you want by Schoenberg up to that. I just have a hard time not feeling this stylistic connection to Stravinsky that doesn't exist in a lot of this other.
All right, have we killed rhythm enough?
Well, I mean, we could kill it some more.
Oh yeah, let's do that.
Rhythm.
All right, so I had my pre-K kids, might have been the same year, that I had them do 2 sets of 4 macrobeat patterns in duple.
It sounds like Eric's weightlifting for audiation. They're doing 2 sets of 4 beats
and duple and 2 sets of triple, and the patterns were like bada bada ba bada bada. That would be one of them. Another one would be bada ba ba bada ba ba ba. No, that's a triple one. I don't remember, but butterflies are butterflies are bada ba ba da ba 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 da ba da ba 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 da ba ba da ba ba da ba ba da ba ba. I think was one of them, and another one was ba da ba 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 da ba 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 da ba da ba ba. And anyway, and I would go just down the row at the end at the end of this teaching. I spent 4 or 5 weeks teaching these patterns, and not only did I teach them on the butter, but I taught them with words. And when I taught them with words, they got the pattern more accurate. They would still be audiating the meter, but they would do, if I said ba 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 ba, they would go ba 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 ba. Right? They would still nail it, but they missed
Mhm.
the rhythm. Ba 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 at the end.
Hold up. I want to make sure this is clear. You're saying that when you taught them the lyrics, they performed the
Yes.
pattern more accurately. Okay, which I think is a lot of people's experience when they're if you teach someone a song with just just neutral syllable versus teaching them the lyrics, I find a lot of kids home run the song when they're taught the lyrics or
Yep.
just the chant because you can do chant with lyrics, right? But what's the problem with only teaching them the lyrics and not having them doing it with the neutral syllable as
Yeah,
well?
it's more
So I think that's
difficult.
where you're
So,
steering
but I
us.
want to make it easier. So how you make it
Uh-huh.
easier is you give them words to go with the rhythms.
So is that
Uh,
considered an issue?
there are so many people that say avoid teaching lyrics at all so that kids can focus on the musical elements. I'm just saying both. Do both.
Sure. There is a benefit to the lyrics as well that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about, but like one thing that really moves the needle on learning is retrieval practice. So people being able to retrieve information that they learned on their own. You will learn better if you can retrieve information than if you're just exposed to it, which is why we have people sing back tonal patterns instead of just listen to them all the time. But I'm talking about a deeper level of retrieval where you have class with me or Eric once a week. If you know the lyrics to the song, what are the chances the kid will sing the song on their own time rather than just the syllables? It's got to be it's got to be non-trivially higher. If the kid knows the lyrics to the song, they're probably just gonna sing the freaking song all the time. That's my
Yeah.
experience. They sing it more on their own, and I think that's just such a
I also
practical
want
way
children
about
to
it.
have agency over what song, and they want that song. Well, what is that song if it doesn't have any lyrics? They want the bus song. Well, that's Wheels on the Bus, or they want, whatever lyrical content is in. Now, the thing that I do, especially with my 1 and 2 year olds, I give them a lot of repertoire where I don't use lyrics, but there are also songs that every time I use the lyrics, I also will do it 3 or 4 or many more times without the lyrics, but they still get to call it, that's the bicycle song or whatever it is. So that gives the kids
Sure,
agency
sure,
in picking and saying what do they want to do? Because you're playing with them. I want classrooms to be playful, and I think this is something that even when we get into the higher levels of learning sequence activities like that, how playful is your environment? Are you just doing the exercise? Is it like a
hmm
hand and or Czerny exercise on piano? Are you just running scales, or is there something playful and valuable in is there more than that? And you can do those exercises, and it's good for your technique and like that, but I'm trying to keep injecting the play in it. Only the girls go, only the boys go. All right, if just
sure.
just getting the energy.
And just to point out though, like what we were talking about before is like some of the disagreements we have um don't come down to cutting things. They just come down to doing things in a couple different ways all simultaneously. But I think there are a lot of people in the MLT community that are very pro lyric because usually there's this more natural split between LSA at the start and then
Yeah.
songs have lyrics throughout class if they're going to have lyrics. But even instrumentally, I'll get people to play the melody on the piano or the
Yeah.
guitar while they sing the lyrics, and then while they don't do the lyrics, while they while they just hear the lyrics on their in their head silently while they play the melody. You know,
Yep.
all that kind of stuff. I think it's. But I want to talk about the playful aspect. One thing that I think about keeping class playful. I've heard a lot of audio from your classes, and we've talked about this. But doing LSAs at the start of class, I think it has a certain, not to make it sound bad, but the sales pitch of saying, okay, keep your class exactly the same, but you just got to do 5 minutes of these tonal patterns or rhythm patterns at the start. I think for like someone like a band director who's, wedded to the notation, and you just tell them, like, look, if you do these 5 minutes of tonal patterns with your kids at the start of class or 5 minutes of rhythm patterns, like, it'll improve their musicianship drastically. That's a very easy to wrap your head around implementation strategy. But when I look at your curriculum or even Maryland's curriculum for music moves for piano, there isn't this period of like a few minutes at the start of class where it's like, the learning sequence activities. This stuff's just all throughout the class. It's sprinkled everywhere, and that's how I've taught too. But I mainly have resorted to this just because it seems like you can do more of it and have more fun with it doing it that way. And not that more to a certain point is better. You can't have 25 minutes of LSA and 5 minutes of songs, but like people just engage more when it's sprinkled throughout the
Well,
whole lesson rather than just
ears
this
do
period
burn
at the
out.
time
You
at
know,
the
I've
start.
had kids just crash and burn, and they do burn out.
Sure.
In my class, they tend to burn out after 20 minutes or a half an hour. I can do long, but I'm sprinkling in rests in there where they're not breaking, where we're not having to audiate. I go off on a story, or I show the vocabulary word up on the board or something if they know it, or we get into a conversation about it, and I go right back to where we were and give the ears a rest a little bit, but it's only a slight rest. But I still be hammering in, major mixolydian, and then mixolydian major, and then major 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 mixolydian, and then mixolydian major, and I'm just doing repertoire. And every time I stop, we'll sing a tonal pattern, a set of tonal patterns that outline the three functions in each of those tonalities. And it
Yeah, and that
doesn't
only
take
takes a few
it
seconds.
doesn't
That does
take
not take
that
long.
long, but it reinforces, the it reinforces the context, that I'm just trying to get them to understand. Hey, and then listen, bum bum bum. What is that? Is that do mi so? Is that so ti re? You don't know. How do you know what that is? Bum bum bum. What is that? And I'll riff on these major and mixolydian songs for a good long while, and the kids, parse it out for themselves out of their experience. But I want to say kids' ears do get tired at some point. It's like I don't even know that's mixolydian or major, and then you leave it alone for a couple weeks and come back, and
Sure.
it's so much easier. But I'll bang on it
Oh
hard
yeah.
like
I
that
mean,
for a while, and then
well, spacing in general has been proven to be absurd for learning. Like if no one's familiar with the spacing literature in education and you're a teacher, I highly recommend seeking out that literature because it's very interesting. And this is one of the reasons why I actually think um, spacing the tonal patterns out is better than just doing it at the start of class because every study on spacing ever done shows that spacing learning out
yeah.
is better than not spacing it out. So I would have a hard time imagining it it not
Yeah, and
being beneficial in this case.
that's a case of 20 minutes or more of tonal patterns that are sprinkled throughout these songs. Um, but then, then we're up and moving, and oh, did you notice that was in triple meter? Do ta da dee do, do ta da dee do, everybody, and then that's it. Maybe I only do a couple three patterns like that,
Sure.
and then I'll play another piece of music that we're moving to. And undervalued again is playing recorded music for your children, because where else are they going to get Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Stravinsky, and then jazz, blues,
Yeah.
name it, Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald. I got tons of great short stuff that
Oh yeah.
I want the kids just to absorb, I say, hey, notice that's like, I'll chant I'll chant a jazz chant that I do a class and say, hey, this one's jazzy, it swings. So I'm saying jazzy and swing. So they're learning the vocabulary of this style that I'm moving to, or what they're dancing to. And I do those rhythm patterns,
The other
couple, 3 times over class easily.
that's how Marilyn's book's laid out too, right? It's just she does little things like that, or in the
Yeah.
teacher guide for her book, things like that are prescribed after all, songs all the time. It's not just at the start. The other thing I wanted to say though is I think that your gauging of where the room is if you're teaching in a group, or your relationship with your student, it does play a role in this, because I have some students that I'm really close with, and if I just start firing off tonal patterns at the start of lesson, they love it. Like there's no issue with that. But if I have a student who's like new, they're one on one with me in a room, it's not necessarily the activity I want to lead with. And I think that's even recommended in MLT world. If your students find the tonal patterns off-putting, start with a lower amount of them. But I actually don't like to start with them at all. I like to start the class with just some kind of song, and then I put the tonal patterns in there, and then I end with songs. I don't really like to start or finish with the tonal patterns. I just but gauging the energy of the room, like you're always trying to breed the energy that's getting more learning,
Yep.
more engagement.
Yeah. No,
uh, from what I've seen
no, my
from talking to you.
lessons are not structured like that. They're structured in that I have these activities, but what happens inside those activities is really, really varies depending on the energy of the class.
That is the from what I could say, the most fun thing about teaching with MLT is that when you really understand how this stuff works, and you have a curriculum, and you have your tonal patterns memorized, and you just have everything dialed in, you can almost just feed off what's happening in the class, because everything you're doing is just pure gold compared to anything else they would ever get. There almost isn't a need to start getting paranoid about, like, well, first 5 minutes this, second 5 minutes this, second. It's just not.
Well, it's not
It's
as
not going to be
fun,
that
but
useful to
yeah,
you.
you might
It's
want
still
to
going to be
start. You might
structured.
want to start
Oh,
that
it's not
way
as fun.
you know, to learn.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like I think having a lesson plan could make you feel a lot more comfortable if you're not comfortable, for sure. But after a certain point, all these songs, the tonal patterns. You're now just really like
Yeah,
dedicating to,
yeah,
like, how are they reacting to this? How could we um and to take that to an extreme, if your students are really jiving on a song and they're into it, you just
yeah,
milk it. Do more things with the song. There's no reason to just move on to the next thing all of a sudden. If they're really engaged, just keep it going for, you know, for a little
When is
extra
it
if they're
not
asking for it.
appropriate to do something really specific? you know, like I, what brought me here is like I just play and dance and sing and roll on the ground and whatever's going on with the 1 and 2 year olds. I'm just one of them. Uh, I'm the leader and I'm doing, full
Sure.
songs and chants like that. But after a while, they start showing me what they're doing, and I'm just with them. And when they do something, I'll copy it and then I'll say it back precisely, uh, or make a point of, did you notice that? But I don't talk about it. I just do a musical response to something that happened, where I'm responding to the
Mhm.
kids. And what I'd like to suggest is I do the same thing with my older kids when they do something. Say they miss a modulation in this choral piece, right? It's like, stop, establish the tonality and the right of where you were, and then go to the modulation, and then establish that,
Oh yeah.
sing some tonal patterns around that for 2 3 minutes, not even, maybe even 30 seconds, and then go back. Same with a band rehearsal. They're not
Yeah.
playing in tune this one chord or whatever it is, and you could stop and sing and fix something no matter when it is. It doesn't have to be the beginning of the class. But on the other hand, ears do get tired, and after you've sung a song or warmed them up with their bodies and some rhythms, or some a hello song or whatever, that probably is the best time to do strict LSAs if you're going to do them.
Sure.
So I
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
make sure that we're not
yeah, yeah.
trouncing
Oh no,
on
I'm
that
definitely
at all.
not.
I'm just saying
I,
I do them all throughout a lesson often.
yeah, I'm definitely not against the. I mean, basically, it's like the 5-25 split. It's the LSA at the beginning of the lesson or whatever.
Yeah.
Even if there's a warm up before, I'm not against that, and I definitely think you can get. I think one of the things that can happen is students get used to it, so they know like, okay, music class starts like this, and they do get used to it over time. Um, yeah, I'm definitely not totally against that.
Yeah.
I just have found that
So so what
not
else about
necessary.
rhythm? So one of the curious things I have is when a young child responds with some kind of rhythm babble, how do we interpret that as purposeful or imitation or random? I think we get stuck trying to put this kid's behavior in one of these buckets, whereas there's a
Okay.
where I think it's uh, these there's stages of pre-audiation, like absorption, random, and then purposeful response, then shedding egocentricity, and so forth. So I don't go through all of them right now, but they're
Yep.
guideposts, and they're spread out, and the kids could be just absorbing, and in the very next moment be audiating, and then or right, they could be imitating, and in the very next moment, be random responsive to something, and I get concerned that we consider these things buckets to put children's responses into rather than just take them into consideration of where to go next. Do I give them a 4 beat pattern or give them a two
Yeah.
beat pattern? Or do I give them, do I, do I,
Exactly. Yeah.
do I engage in a conversation back and forth where we're imitating each other, or do I want a conversation where I'm different? Whatever you do, I'm going to do something different back. And you wouldn't want to do that
This
if the
is
kids just completely in random response. But when they start to get purposeful and imitative, then I do want to instigate these more difficult improvisatory or creative um, conversations, which I think are the gold mine.
what you're saying is super interesting, and this is actually this happens a lot when people are thinking about systems. So when you have a system that's had a lot of parts, like we're talking about someone learning to audiate has these stages. It's a system that people have to go through with stages. What people tend to do is they get hell bent on a local aspect of the system or like a local efficiency. So it's like now they're at pre-audiation, or now they're at random response, or now they're at imitation. Or for a factory, it could be like this machine has this job in the system. But what people tend to screw up on is they think that by maximizing one part of the system, it's going to increase the benefit of the whole. And so you could, as a teacher, you could I think it's great to understand the theoretical basis for all of this as a teacher, but there's a point where knowing where they are is helpful, and knowing where they are, it ends up leading you to do things that in the long run might not even be that beneficial for them anyway. Because I think you have a pretty good eye on what's going on in the class. Like you're not throwing this theory out the window, but you're not like keeping a tally sheet that's like, okay, at like 15 minutes into the class, Joey was in pre-audiation. Now I got to keep a record of that. And then she was in imitation. And then, you just have this like, you have a general idea of what's happening. And that's going to lead you to decide, well, should I make this like ridiculously more difficult for them? Or should I make it like, not as challenging, or should I play with them more in this way? But sometimes these local focuses, they disrupt people from actually I mean, think of the parallel in language. If you're trying to teach someone their first language, what's the system? Put them around a lot of people that are speaking the language, and enough vocabulary has to be learned, and they will start learning it. But if you tried to make like a checklist, well, like Timmy this week learned all these words and then all these words. I'm not saying we shouldn't teach kids vocabulary, but we actually know that learning vocabulary through dictionary definitions is a completely unrealistic way to learn vocabulary. You pretty much have to learn vocabulary just in context by induction through a lot of exposure. So it's like it's great that we know the theory of how people learn language, but in a sense, like if you're a kid and you're in Eric's class, like there's so much going on in this class that like if he didn't keep like a really hyper metric on where you are in this specific phase,
Yeah,
it's not gonna have some kind of
kids
negative
cycle through
impact.
these stages, and it's nice to know generally where they are and what kind of things you can do, you know, that might be best for them. But I just hear an awful lot of, I think this kid was an imitation, and I'm not sure if he's at the next level, or I'm not sure if this is a random or purposeful
Sure.
response. In fact, now there's a little bit of dialogue that random and
Hmm.
purposeful really are the same thing on the spectrum. Well, I'm considering all of LSA's on a kind of on a spectrum, or all kids. Plus, you're talking about one kid's tonal, the pre-audiational development versus another kid's. Plus, you're talking about that kid's
Hmm.
pre-audiational development tonally within the kid and rhythm. And
Well, you have to take the teacher into account here, right? The teacher only has so much RAM or horsepower. The teacher only has so much working memory at their disposal while they're teaching, and how much of that should be delegated towards these types of thoughts in the moment? Probably not an obsessive amount.
yeah,
I
I
would
just want to
imagine it's
infuse
not that
energy
helpful.
into the class, right? And I
It is interesting though, the
this
imitation question. Like, on it, I teach instrumentally, right? It's like, how do you? It's an interesting question. Like, how can you tell if what someone just played for you is just imitation or is audiation based when you just taught them how to play something by rote? I think you can more or less figure that out with enough experience. Uh, but I mean, at a certain stage, it's like the imitation is going to lead them to where they have to go
yeah.
anyway. And
So, one last thought on rhythm, and we'll cover the other 3 pages. We got through 4 items on this list of things where I'm either reconsidering typical or traditional music learning theory practices or ideas that go beyond what's typical, or some other complaints that I have about what I see in teaching, and it goes across the board. But the one thing I'll harp on the strongest is we don't do near enough expression when we're doing rhythm. Not even a little
expressive
bit
movement.
enough. Everybody does ba 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 ba. Well, that's very expressive. That's fine. But what's ba 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 ba? And I go around and I clobber a kid on the head with a scarf. Ba 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 ba. And I walk, and they just think that's hilarious. So if they think that's hilarious, well, I've got a different level of engagement than ba 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 ba. I'm like ba 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 jumping on,
Yeah.
and causing, and then also the real light stuff and everything I can do. I even start to cry sometimes, and boy, does that get the attention of 2 and 3 year olds.
Oh man.
And they look at me like, and some of them are like laughing, and some of them are immediately empathetic, and you see their face just turn. But if we just play and get more than the normal realm of emotions that happen, uh, generally in a music class, that's so much better. Because also if you get kids to yell
Yeah.
and scream and cry with you, then I think it gives them a little bit of agency over when they actually are feeling bad. I've felt this before, but it wasn't so bad because I did it in music class. And I'm not sure how much that works or doesn't, but I kind of hope that, the psychological development that's going on simultaneous with all this other musical stuff, we've got to take into consideration. And there's not uh, enough room in any book to talk about how you know, physical coordination, uh, psychological readiness, tonal aptitude, rhythm aptitude, harmonic aptitude, right? Whether they had a good day, you know, a good breakfast before they came in. My demeanor, you
Oh,
know,
sure.
the content of the song. If it's about a cat, you know, I have a couple, you know, songs where the cat dies, comes back to life. You know, it's like you got to balance all of these kinds of things. Um,
Oh, and I think movement is is often thrown out the window for it's very easily thrown out the window when you're an instrumental teacher. It's so and I just throw that context up because
yeah,
that's my wheelhouse right now. But it's so easy to just toss that out the window when you're teaching someone piano or guitar. It's so commonly done. I was actually saying to you earlier, I think I've noticed I've had a bunch of students over the year who have, you get to know your students, you ask them what they do outside of class and stuff. But the ones that take dance, they have no problem bringing the expressive movement to playing the instrument. It's like it's just part of their rhythm vocabulary is to
yeah,
move while they play and while they phrase things. And uh, I've always
yeah.
thought it would be really interesting um, to team up with more uh, dance teachers. Like what if the school had a dance program that taught
Yeah.
them rhythm patterns, while they did movement.
Well,
I think that'd be
movement should be
pretty
throughout
solid.
everything, but especially with rhythm. And I've got some bones to pick about that we can get into next time.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. All right, so that was our nitty gritty rhythm part one.
Send us questions.
Yeah, just to say again before we sign off, we're looking forward in the near future to doing some listener question episodes. So these could range from specific questions you have for Eric about how to implement anything about harmonic learning sequence. It could be anything about the MLT implementation, the practicality of classroom execution of this stuff, or just anything related
Go
to,
to
to any of this. We'd love to have questions.
teachmusictokids.com, all spelled out, and there's a tab that you can put a voicemail on there. I think it's 90 seconds long or something. You have a chance to ask your questions or give us comments or whatever. It's ugly right now, so if you go there, it's not very pretty, but you can at least leave us a message there or send a message if you just want to write it down to teachmusictokids at gmail.com. But that's where we are right now. So cool. All right, thanks,
Excellent.
Bo.
All right, thanks, Eric.